Hello, everyone. We're just going to get started in just a minute. I am trying to pin our presenters. Oops, dang it. Um, so I will just go ahead and get started, and then I'll work on adding pins we are, as soon as we're getting started. Anybody else who's able to do that, Hannah, I'm going to make you the co-host so you can help, and same with you, Melanie. Um, and then if you guys can help, just go add people's pins. Okay, so welcome everyone. Noam, I'm going to unpin you since you are now just everybody can see only you. So let me do that really quick. Okay. For those of you that are new to Bragg, our mission is to provide a forum for collegial interaction in the research administration community. We do this by facilitating presentations by subject matter experts, creating an environment to foster peer-to-peer exchanges, and seeking and sharing best practices, which is what we're doing today. So today is part of our sharing best practices, um, and we've put together a panel of research administrators across different units, and we're going to talk today about cost share. And so I'll do a brief speaker introduction. Um, I am Kate Lewis. I am the Associate Director of the Industry Alliances Office. I'm approaching my 20-year anniversary this summer, and I've worked many different areas of research administration, including as a frontline research administrator in the Berkeley Seismo Lab. I also worked in SPO as a subaward specialist turned C&G officer, and I've been in industry alliances for 12 years. We handle industry-sponsored research and SBIR, STTR sub-agreements, along with a variety of unfunded agreements like material transfers, data transfers, non-disclosure, IP management plans, and more. Coming in from BRS, we have Sarah Gagler and Hannah Holloway. Sarah is a contracts and grants supervisor in the URSO region, and she just hit her 10-year mark this week. Hannah is a contracts and grants supervisor in the Share region and has been with UCB for 12 years and counting. Sarah and Hannah co-led the RAPDP course on cost share. Come take their course on 519, and you can sign up in the UC Learning Center. Coming from SPO, we have Noam Pines, who's the Associate Director in SPO, and he oversees incoming and outgoing contracts and grants. With over 15 years of experience in research administration, he has handled a wide spectrum of proposals and awards from a variety of funding agencies, with a focus on governmental agencies, federal, non-fed, international, and nonprofit. And then we have Katie Hudson coming in from CGA. Katie is a manager in Central Contracts and Grants Accounting. She's been at Berkeley for 19 years, starting as an RA2 in MCB and spending many years in shared services, RA leadership before joining CGA. And finally, from VCR Research, we have Rebecca Bishop. And for the last 2.5 years, she's been a financial analyst with the Vice Chancellor for Research Office, VCRO, and thoroughly enjoys her role. So at this point, Melanie, could you start the recording if you haven't already? We have a number of questions that came in through that survey that we sent out. So we'll go through those and we'll ask our panelists to give some input. And also please feel free to put questions in the chat. And as we can, we'll get to those as well. You can also put comments, you can put feedback, anything that you would like in the chat. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to give a brief introduction of cost share.
Kate. Hi, everyone. Good morning, since it's still morning here in California. I'm going to give a quick brief intro on what cost share is and when it is and is not appropriate to use cost share. So cost share only occurs when an applicant contributes resources to a sponsored project beyond the amount funded by the sponsor. So cost sharing can be mandatory or voluntary, and voluntary cost sharing may be committed or uncommitted. For more details, please see the UC Learning Center for the online course. It's appropriate to do cost sharing when cost sharing is mandatory, right? The solicitation is asking for it. It must occur within the period of performance for the award, and the cost contributed must be allowable, and allocable to the project. A good rule of thumb, which you will hear if you ever take a course from Hannah or myself, is if it's not allowed on the sponsored fund, it cannot be used as cost share fulfillment. Statements of cost sharing commitment can be and are legally binding for the institution should the proposal be funded, even when not required by the sponsor. So best practice is not to commit cost sharing unless it's required by that sponsor solicitation.
Excellent, thank you. So we're first going to get started with some best practices for cost share. And my role in this is very limited from the industry alliances. Basically, I'm just going to say, don't do it. If you have industry funding, we do not do cost share unless it's specifically required by the sponsor. And in my experience, that's one sponsor, that's SRC. That's the only one ever. Don't ever do it. Please don't ever do it. Don't even give it to us. We do not want to subsidize industry. So that's my whole role. So next I'll just ask questions. So the first question, we had a lot of folks who are interested in hearing about best practices for RAs who don't yet have experience in managing awards with cost share. So our first question is for SPO. And then I'm going to also turn this over to BRS. So for SPO, why does SPO allow for, or what does SPO allow for cost share on unfunded collaborative projects?
When do we allow for it on unfunded projects?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'll take a step back from that and then hopefully come back to it and answer the question. Because I know Kate came out very aggressively, which I love, because we do not particularly like people to cost share. But what I will say is that there are voluntary situations that might make sense. And we at SPO are not necessarily going to like forbid people from doing voluntary cost sharing unless that's a rule of an agency, like NSF, for example. So in an unfunded situation, I mean, what comes to mind, I think we've seen some situations from like the European Union where there might be like a requirement to do some kind of cost sharing for a collaborative agreement where we're not getting funding. So it's a conversation we have with the PI to see if like participating in that kind of project makes sense. I would say that in most situations we would like strongly discourage putting forth resources like that in a quantified way, particularly when we're not receiving money. But again, to go back to my larger statement, it's not like a straight like bam. There might be situations where there's some kind of benefit to the researcher unit and or university where we would consider doing that. So I know that's kind of like an annoying gray answer. You'll probably get a lot of those from me next, however, much time we have left here. But just let me know if that answers the question. I'm happy to follow up.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments on that from any of our other panelists in terms of how you respond, especially for BRS, how you would respond to a PI wanting to do cost share on an unfunded collaboration?
I've ever experienced that situation before, personally.
I feel like we have quite a few of those in URSO, to be honest. And typically we don't find out until it's awarding. It's like at time of award. So the RAs aren't typically involved in that setup, which is partially why these are so kind of confusing. And it seems weird to be doing cost share on things where we're not getting sponsor funding for,
Well, thank you. Amy, I see your hand.
Hi, yeah, thanks. This isn't regarding unfunded collaborations, but no, I just wanted clarification on something you said. It was my understanding that you weren't allowed to do voluntary cost share just in general on sponsored awards. Is that understanding not correct?
Yeah, so it's not totally correct. I mean, again, like we do follow an agency guideline, like the National Science Foundation is just like you cannot do voluntary cost share, so we would enforce that. We do strongly, I mean, I guess this might be semantics, but maybe a little deeper than semantics. Like we definitely go through the rounds of telling a PI, hey, we don't think you should do this, and here's why. But we don't go as far as to say like you cannot do it. So an understanding, if your understanding was like forbids voluntary cost share, that's not accurate. What we do is if we see it, we'll respond to it and say, you know, it's not mandatory. Here are the negative effects for the university, and here's why we don't think you need to do it. But if they have some kind of justification to do it and it's supported, I think this comes up in a later question, like the PI wants to put up money, can they just do it? Like we always do defer to like departmental approval. So if it's been cleared with like the chair or dean, and SPO has done like an element of pushback, the PI still feels strongly that it should be there, we will allow it.
So this next question is still on the topic of unfunded collaboration cost share. So in cases where unfunded collaboration cost share needs to be reported and tracked, is it reported and tracked through SPO and CGA, or is it separate? And then if it is not reported and tracked through SPO and CGA, is there a campus risk there to not have it being reported and tracked there? And SPO, I'll start with you and then we'll go over to Katie.
Yeah, I was gonna quickly kick it to to Katie. I mean, I think like there is an element of risk there, right? Anytime that something isn't like centrally tracked. But this is one of those instances, and Katie can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would depend on the department doing that outside of the system, so to speak. So I'll let Katie comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, on the CGA side, we don't have an award to attach it to. That sort of leaves it out of our general scope. That said, if you get to the end of something and you have a report that needs a central signature, you could talk to Lynn or I. That would hopefully be a pretty rare situation, but I mean, it would be the same concept in the department in terms of use a CF1 so that the main heart of what you're trying to get to is that you haven't double counted the cost share. So it wouldn't be our officially attributed CF1 because there's no award to attribute it to. So yeah, it's definitely off our radar. And we're not necessarily looking to put it on our radar, but if again, if you need some sort of you know, check on something, I'd talk to one of the managers.
I'll also add just on the topic of like risk, and this is probably obvious, but like, you know, we do distinguish between non-federal funding and federal funding. We've had some rare cases where like UC Berkeley has signed up for like what I call an outgoing membership. So we're like signing up to be part of a consortium that then allows us to apply for funding. And sometimes just by virtue of signing up for the membership, there is some like cost share-ish things going on where we have had to work as a one-off with CGA. So this is my long-winded way of saying if it's like unfunded, so to speak, but it's a federal program, we would view that differently. And then you want to talk to SPO and CGA about how to do that.
I guess it's a follow-on question to that. Is why does the burden of tracking cost share on unfunded collaborative projects fall to the RAs when it really is a campus risk? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that too.
I mean, I think I'm repeating myself, but it's like I think the calculation is that it's less of a risk in the non-federal scenario, and then for the logistical reasons that Katie outlined, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to be involved. So I understand from the RA's perspective, it's not like the best outcome, but I don't know that there's a better way to do it. I see Katie unmuted herself as well.
Yeah, when I was just going to say, I feel like maybe we're getting into a specific situation here, possibly that maybe we would take offline. So if you are perhaps looking for a heavy because your PI has some big ideas that maybe feel risky and SPO and CGA seem to be wiping their hands of the situation, we can talk offline about that because maybe you need our assistance in explaining the problem of a commitment to a PI. We're happy to talk about that.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we're going to pivot into commitment of funds. So the question is, if a PI wants to commit cost share funding from their own discretionary funding or an unrestricted gift, does the department still have to approve the cost share letter, or can the PI make that commitment on their own?
I think I was, and this is like best practices and so forth. So I always like to hear how things are happening on the ground. Like my perspective is anything that's coming to us, we do look for like that department level vetting on cost share. So even though one could say like, hey, it's the PI's money, can't they just sign off on it? We would look for that secondary approval. I think the gift side of things, I'd be interested to hear the BRS perspective because that's like a little bit different, but that's just my 2 cents.
I think we lost Hannah. I know she's been having some Zoom problems today. So Sarah, do you have any
I
BR?
was just gonna say, where did Hannah go? Okay, so I know for URSO specifically, we have a cost share form that we utilize that does require that higher level signature, regardless of the funding source you're using. So we get our RA supervisors to or managers to sign off on that form, the PI to sign off on that, and then the department chair for whatever funding source we're using, whether it's effort, discretionary funds, what have you. So we do get those extra things. The PI. We don't like our PIs going rogue and just like kind of doing things without anyone being looped in, right? So we like to make sure we have our ducks in a row and our receipts in order and get all of those approvals from whoever we need to get them from. So definitely higher level approvals from URSO, at least at any rate. And Hannah and I teach that in our RAPDP class as well. We want those sign-offs from those fund managers as well. And those, higher ups for those departmental funds.
Okay, Hannah's back. Hi, Hannah. You can leave your camera off. That's fine. We will move on to the next question. So an RA is getting questions from faculty about what they can commit as cost share besides their discretionary funds and academic research effort. What kinds of other resources can be cost shared without getting into sticky messes? What are faculty across campus committing to meet their obligations? And for this one, I first want to turn it over to Rebecca to talk about VCRO cost share and what that looks like, and then I'll turn it over to everyone else.
Sure. So when a new cost share is created for the VCRO, our policy is that, you notify the FA as soon as possible so that we can help facilitate the budget transfer. You can use a variety of funds. I've seen it on general funds. I've seen cost shares on endowed funds. And so yeah, it's pretty, I've seen it on a variety of funds, not just a PI's discretionary funds. It's the FA's kind of responsibility, at least within the VCRO, to move that budget into the cost share line for tracking purposes. We generally ask that the full amount be allocated up front at the beginning because it's no longer, like if it's a departmental fund, it's no longer available for the department to use. It's committed funds now. And so if it's a multi-year commitment, we can break that out and set up like annual budget transfers. That way, if say it's a 5-year, $10,000 a year commitment, you don't have to allocate the full 50,000 right away if you don't have it. But we need to set up a schedule so that like I can calendar it, and next year I can at the same time each year just allocate that 10,000 to the cost share line. Yeah, so then if it's related to a grant, that's all I've worked with before is cost shares that are actually required by a grant. And so if it is required by that grant, then those committed funds are now basically part of that grant, and they're no longer the FA's responsibility to manage. We do the budget transfers and then it's kind of hands off. The RA then manages that line for the cost share moving forward. But we really do appreciate it when we're kind of given a heads up towards the beginning and not just all of a sudden a couple of years later there's a church string line that's in deficit or something because it's related to the cost share. So I think that's pretty much all for us. I don't know, Brenda, if you have anything additional, but
No, that sums it up pretty well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts from BRS, SPO, CGA? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I could chime in on perhaps misunderstood and underutilized sometimes categories, both waived and contributed. Okay, so I'm going to put in the chat the SPO link that I refer to all the time because I can never remember which is which and how exactly it's defined. But I mean, basically, if there's IDC that is waived on the primary grant and you budget it as such, and the sponsor doesn't disallow it on the front end as a cost share contribution, that can definitely be a cost share contribution. That would be show up as waived. The other piece would be contributed. So if you are, say, using some 9900 funds, again, if you budgeted accordingly on the proposal end, you could certainly count that as count a corresponding IDC amount as contributed up to our full IDC amount. So again, I think that has not been super consistently used or interpreted in the past, but I find the SPO description of those two terms, contributed FNA and waived FNA, pretty good and clear. And for us in CGA, and talk to a manager if you're getting any pushback on this, but the clincher there is whether it's been set up on the front end, because that just sort of clarifies what we wouldn't want to see is if you said you're like contributing $100,000 and then, on the back end, you're reporting, 60,000 of that as waived FNA from the primary grant. That would not really be fulfilling your proposal or your original commitment.
No?
Yeah, just on the topic of I thought that was really useful, Katie. And then if you drill down into the different kinds of cash contributions, people think about university funds and third-party funds, right? The two basic categories. And I think the question asks about is there anything besides effort? I mean, we do see things like equipment or space, sometimes from third parties that require valuations that can be committed. And then the one that I think, hopefully I'm not taking us too far off track here, but there's the whole I'm an NIHPI and I want to commit 5%, but I'm not being compensated. So it's a percent effort commitment, which I understand, and Katie can chime in here, does have an equivalent, maybe cash value, but it's not necessarily treated the same way where NIH expects us to report those dollars. So that's also kind of a special category of the percent effort situation that might have an equivalent cash contribution, but it doesn't always get reported back to the sponsor.
Yeah, faculty academic year effort that, they certainly have time available to research during the academic year that may be paid by their 9900 funds. But if you're putting a dollar figure on that, and again, this is to keep in mind at the proposal stage, if you're putting a dollar figure on that, then we actually want to see it, tagged accordingly, that percentage with the cost share CF1. Whereas, I would say it's very typical to have NIH effort commitments, including of academic year effort. Well, I don't know. The guidance on that has kind of shifted in recent years, but if you need to have, if you're trying to get to a dollar amount and you're using academic year effort, then just keep in mind that's going to come with tracking it with the CF1.
That's the question. How does it get tracked? Because it's impossible to track.
Well, you can. You're going to have to work with your department because it is their appointment. You guys probably mostly see your faculty's effort during the summer. Well, and now there's this extra salary program and you may be participating in FESREP. But this would be a place where you would really need to coordinate with the faculty's department to get that CF1 tag on there. And by the way, if your department is talking about system-wide program tagging and they need their CF1, you can have multiple attributes on a CF1. So you could have system-wide program and cost share. So yeah.
So let's move on to the next question. So the PI has an award, including a third-party cost share for considering fair market value of land and equipment and a UC vehicle. So they want to use the fair market value of land, the equipment, and the UC vehicle as cost share. This person would like to know if appraisal needs to be done in order to be able to include things like that as cost share.
I mean, I think so, and maybe someone from BRS can chime in about like, because I mean, appraisal is kind of like a broad term. Like, I mean, we need an assessment of the values. Like, if you're putting equipment in there, there has to be some way that it was calculated in a reasonable way, just like you follow the normal liability principles. But yeah, I don't know if someone from BRS might have experience with that.
I would assume an appraisal would need to be done because you need to be able to quantify it, right? That's like the whole point. You have to be able to quantify it so we can report and track on it. We have to assign some kind of dollar value to it, and we need to, like, how are you coming up with that? Right? So I would assume appraisals would be needed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, I think like land is kind of like,
Land is a little harder.
yeah, I don't know that we see that every day, but like if you
Yeah.
think about space, like I've seen space committed by
Mhm.
like that follows a formula of like this is what it costs, or you know,
Right.
like here's the proportion we're assessing the project. So
Mhm.
you just follow that kind of line of thinking.
Oh, one other idea is you might talk to your local recharge expert in terms of rate setting. The same concepts could apply for fair costing or fair valuation here.
Hannah?
But also, in addition to the appraisal, we'd also need to make sure that we're getting the correct proportion. That's like for the vehicle, like, say there's 1,000 miles in a month driven. Well, were those 1,000 miles solely for that cost share, or was there other projects or other purposes involved? So we have to make sure that there's the appraisal done, but we also have to make sure that we're just allocating the correct portion to the cost share for the benefits to that one specific project.
Okay, so we have another question. We briefly talked about IDC as a contribution to cost share goals. But the question is, how is it actually assessed on a cost share chart string? So their example is a department chair director's fully burdened effort on department funds is used as cost share. Or is that not the case? Does that make sense?
It does. I would say all IDC that's being used as cost share is going to be manually calculated.
Second exit, stay on Piedmont Avenue.
Because for example, if a PI is using part of their academic salary as cost share, it's going to be on 9900. 9900 is not going to get assessed as IDC.
Sorry.
Okay, so IDC is not going to get assessed on certain funds because that fund is not IDC bearing. So therefore, if IDC is being used as cost share from charges charged to 19900, the RA has to manually calculate what that IDC would be if it was charged to the grant. So there's a lot of manual calculation when you're using IDC as cost share, which is why we encourage people not to do it, because it's a big administrative burden.
Yeah, definitely you won't see IDC assess on cost share chart strings because those are almost always discretionary non-sponsored funds that you're using for cost share. So the regions obviously have developed tracking sheets to help with that because we do claim that, unrecovered IDC, but that you're not going to see it on the ledger. So it is much more of an administrative burden for the RA because we have to track that manually and separately outside the ledger.
So I'll jump in because there's probably at least one or two people out there who might be aware of this and wondering about it. But I really kind of need to sit down with Sarah and Hannah and work on some general guidance about it. But there is a report in BFS and the RA Grants Work Center called Cost Share Details that is pulling in lines referring to contributed F&A and waived F&A. So on those 19,900 lines, you can't just like use it as is because like those earlier caveats about you would want it to be budgeted on the front end to really be counting as fulfilling your commitment. But that report is out there. It has some potential. I think some people have pulled it and some people have been like kind of confused about it. And okay, not to get too far off track, but I don't think there's a question specifically about reporting. So I can also say that I know that Adobe form is terrible. We are going to, I mean, just mechanically terrible, and it's got some glitches. So we need to update that, although our plan right now is not to have a super spiffy report that pops out of BFS as what we've been talking about in the past, but really just to repeat that form that we have, but just have it be more functional and up to date. And if we can combine that guidance with this cost share details report out of the RA Grants Work Center, then hopefully that could make the reporting part a little bit more straightforward.
Thank you. So the next major topic is it's kind of a how-to. So how to calculate cost share. Could I ask the panelists, please, to just give some best practices or guidance on the best ways to calculate cost share?
The simple answer is the same way you calculate your sponsor budget. So essentially, you create your budget for the sponsored funds, the sponsor requests that you're going to do. You should do a separate budget form for the cost share portion. So it's all the same calculations, same way you would calculate your sponsored budget.
Sarah also just shared from the SPO website calculating cost share, which is really helpful. Are there any other thoughts on this? Good. So now we're going to move into closeout of cost share. If there's anything that we're missing before we get to the closeout part. So Katie, thank you for talking about reporting. Are there any things that our panelists want to say that's between the basics, how to, and then closeout?
I have a question.
Yes.
Angela, hi. In regards to departmental cost share or PI effort cost share or anything that we just get a letter for that determines the type of cost share, can there be some type of like template put in place that all the departments use so that the costs are broken down? Some of the letters I get say 30,000 for labor and 20,000 for this, and it's like that's not I can't really work with that because I don't know what it's specifically supposed to cover. And so I do a lot of push back and forth with that, especially with all of my state awards that I do that have cost share. And I was just wondering if anybody else has thought of some type of like standard, like here are the items you need to put in the cost share letter. Make sure, however you want to put it, just make sure these items are in there. Anybody have any ideas on how I can get departments to do that, share that?
You're talking about a template for the letter, it sounds like.
Yeah, like the department gives us letters that says, this letter is to confirm the department is providing this much in cost share to cover labor benefits and travel. But they don't break down like what they do. So I normally put together a budget for them, send it over, say, does this look okay to get to this total? They're like, sometimes yes, sometimes no. I just wondered if there was a more standardized thing that they could send me, that all departments would send me the same type of information in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll let, Hannah probably wants to say something about this. If I remember correctly, there were some budget templates.
Yeah, the templates we've got, it's like the actual letter that the department signs. They just kind of type up however.
No, I'll shut up and I'll let BRS comment.
I would say having one template for all departments on campus is going to be quite the challenge because our campus likes to say departments can make their own policies and practices, you know. So I would say definitely, hopefully that you're working with another RA in that department. And so that way you can work with that RA, and most RAs know what should be in a letter. Or I would say maybe when you communicate up front with the department, just say, I need these specific details. Maybe Sarah and I could get together and get a best practice template. We couldn't force every department on campus to use it, but we could definitely put it out there
I
as
wasn't
something that
thinking like
can be
the whole
used.
campus to use. I was just thinking,
Yeah.
if anybody else have a template on their desk that they make their people use that they could send on over? Hi,
No,
Miriam.
there's
You do a lot of the cost share like I do, same stuff.
Yes, I was gonna say, so you're talking about our Cowboys, right?
Yes.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, they, you know, mosey along and do their own thing, and then are surprised when somebody says that it's clear. What's not clear about it? So I actually agree with Angela that it would be really helpful for us to just say, this is the template that somebody else put together, and you need to follow it and provide this detail. End of story.
I think I'm just gonna make one myself.
Yeah, yes, that too. I like to be able to do good cop, bad cop because I try to stay the good cop. So everybody else, you guys are bad cop. Okay. So, but it does, you know, I think that it, it's one thing for me to say, I need this information. It's another thing for me to say, Gnome said you have to do this. And oh, okay. They don't argue with me then, right? So because it's coming from someplace else. It's not just my preference. So yeah, I think that I think it's a good idea. And I don't know how much other people are getting cost share, but I know that a lot of my people are putting in proposals where they get points for their cost, and it's a point structure, and they get points for their cost share, and so they're absolutely doing it. And it's very scattered in what kind of cost share they're providing. So I mean, it's not just standard you know, faculty effort, you know, VCRO, College of Engineering, you know, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, yippee, we're happy, everything's good. No. It's very scattered and changes also over time. So yeah, I think that the more specific you can get in the cost share letter, the less confusion there is in the future when people have forgotten about this and moved on to other things. So that's
No.
me.
Yeah, I lied and said I was going to shut up, but I can't help myself. I just, I had a thought that in addition to, I think it is a good idea to think about like a letter template, but if there is a accompanying cost share budget or breakdowns that you need, like this could be, it's hard for SPO to get involved in this, but like a particular region could be like, if you're going to give me a letter, you also need to provide a backup budget document for me to look at it. I mean, it's just one idea that occurred to me.
Angela's really good at that.
I want to give a shout out to the Bragg email list. So as you are thinking about developing cost share letters or other shared resources or things that you want to share with the research administration community, that's a great way to email it out. I know URSO has their intranet, and other groups have their wikis and other internal to the region systems and things like that. Gnome, I know we have a lot of cost share stuff on the SPO website, so we can also think about where to put things once there's a final product. But just remember that we have the Bragg listserv to share these things, because I think if you think it's important, lots of other people think it's important too. Okay, so let's move along to closeout. So the first question, it's a bit long, so let me read it, and then it's got 3 different parts. So in the past, our department allocated cost share funding with cost share CF1 code for grants and contracts with unrestricted funds. Now that the grant and contract funds have closed, we are having the following issues. 1, the cleanup problem. They're getting an error message when processing an operation journal to zero this cost share chart string as these funds have already been closed. 2, we are not able to use the funding even though it's in unrestricted fund codes. We are also not able to reallocate the funds for other purposes. 3, who can we work with to clear this out? So who wants to take a crack at this one? Katie.
Yeah, there's, I mean, as far as rebudgeting after the project code and the chart fields that have shut down, we can help you in CGA by overriding that. I advocate. I know what it is to have, all your expenses on blank CF1 and all the budget on the cost share CF1 or vice versa. Hopefully vice versa, because we want the expenses on the real cost share CF1. And if it doesn't annoy you, it's annoying your DFL and you're hearing about it. So yeah, I guess talk to me. It's probably a situation where I have you create the budget and then we can submit it. And I think you are still able to approve it in your unit. But yeah, I feel for you on that. If it's old expenses have to be straightened out between CF1s and the closeout and reporting has already been done, I think the expenses have to sit where they are.
Can I add a little bit to that, Kate? Sorry. I was trying to find the raise your hand feature button here and I couldn't find it. But I wanted to just plug again what Rebecca had shared earlier. I think a lot of these overdraft type issues that happen at closing time can be prevented if the budget is allocated at the beginning of the cost share, right? And so I think that it's really important for the FAs, and I definitely advocate this with my team, with the FAs and the RAs to work collaboratively, especially when it comes to cost share, because cost share can get very messy at closure, especially, Rebecca herself, she became the expert of cost share in just 2 years because she had to she worked with Katie, I believe, in reopening some of these grant funds to clean out, some of these overdraft lines. So again, I think that if we work together, the FAs and the RAs at the beginning stages of cost share, we can, I'm not going to say eliminate it completely. There's always, things that happen, but we can definitely minimize those kinds of issues. Thanks.
Mavis?
Yes. So our department has some issues like this. It's older grant and contract, and it's already been closed. So I was just wondering if we can work with anyone because it seems like there's still funding there not being expensed at. So we can't utilize the fund or reallocate it. So I will work with Katie to figure it out, or.
Yeah, the piece I'm talking about us doing an override is if you have your campus fund, like 19900, you're not able to do that budget transfer now. If we've closed out the grant fund and there's balances in different charge donations of the grant fund, we're not going to mess with that. And what we can work on is getting the fund inactivated so it's not showing up in the portfolio.
Okay.
So I want to chime in for a couple of things here from the BRS side. I know, Mavis, you're in physics, right?
Correct.
Hi, nice to see you officially.
Yes, nice to meet you.
So from my understanding, when we have cost share, this is kind of how we teach it in the class and how we operate in URSO, or we should be, at least at any rate. We have cost share, we hit our cost share chart strings, right? The cost share CF1 is tied to that sponsored award. When that sponsored award ends and is cleaned up and closed, then that chart string with the CF1 is also inactivated and closed. So then you can't use it, which is why you're seeing some of these balances or overdrafts on these chart strings with a cost share CF1, and you're trying to move it, but you can't because the initial sponsored award is closed and has inactivated that CF1.
Yes.
For you, Mavis, you'd want to work with your RA because the RA will need to work with CGA to kind of figure out what we can do for those to get those cleaned up. What should really happen at closeout for cost share is if there is a balance on a cost share CF1 for a cost share fund, the balance needs to be, or the budget balance needs to be moved off that cost share CF1 so that the cost share CF1 chart string is at 0.
Right.
That's really what should happen. If you got any of that money funding from the VCRO, that balance should be returned. It isn't just money that the PIs can use. It really needs to go back to where it came from. Same thing if it's your gifts, right? If it's gifts or departmental funds, it should be the budget balance should be moved via an operating transfer off that cost share CF1. It does become harder if the main sponsored fund has closed, which is why then we, the RAs, need to work closely with the department and CGA to figure out what we can do to move that balance off, especially if it's past that award closeout period.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is segueing into our next question. I think we've already started covering some of this. What steps do we need to take as RAs when closing out a project with cost share? And then what are some common mistakes that happen when managing cost share funds? Miriam, I'll get to your question in just a minute. I'd like to turn it over to our panel. So best practices, what needs to happen when closing out a project. Sarah, I think you just mentioned zeroing out balances is really important, making sure those funds go back to their original funds or meeting balances. Other thoughts on that?
I mean, just besides your normal reporting for cost share, right? You want to submit your final cost share report and work with CJ to make sure that that's submitted to the sponsor as part of closeout.
And then in your experience, what are some common mistakes that you're seeing?
Well, we definitely talk about, Hannah and I definitely talk about this in our RAPDP course. If it's not allowed on the sponsored fund, you can't use it for cost share fulfillment, right? So like if you have federal sponsored awards, you can't be cost sharing GAIL or UCRP. We'll see that sometimes come through. I feel like that's the biggest one I see. Or people just not reporting on cost share, which is a bit of a mess especially if you inherit an award and you're trying to kind of catch up on all of that. I think best practice for when you inherit an award with cost share is do an audit of that cost share to make sure that everything is matching, that the PASs that we receive from SPO or IAO all match that to make sure we're, it's reflecting in CGA so CGA knows what we're reporting on as well. We've had a few instances where those were missed, so that was a little bit of a cleanup on our ends as well.
Just to build on what Sarah said, I would say probably the number one common mistake is when we're cost sharing payroll onto a federal fund with that UCRP and GAIL. In our budget forms, because it's flagged as federal, it's not going to include GAIL and UCRP charges in the budget form. However, when that payroll is actually charged to that cost share charge string, let's say 9900, GAIL and UCRP will be assessed. There's no way around that. So a lot of times the department will provide their cost share letter stating a dollar amount that does not include GAIL and UCRP. And then they transfer the budget over, and then the expenses hit, and the expenses end up being more than the budget because GAIL and UCRP is there. So that's kind of the big common mistake. And I think that just needs to be better communication with the department of these small little charges are going to hit. Maybe the PI is willing to cover it from their discretionary funds, and you can move those off to a different discretionary fund off the cost share. They're still going to be on that cost share CF1. They're just not included in the budget form. They're not included on the cost share report. If you include UCRP and GAIL on a cost share report for federal funds, CGA is going to kick it right back to you. The other common mistake, as Sarah mentioned, is just not tracking, not reporting. I encourage people to review their cost share every month with their monthly reporting. Every month when I had a lot of cost share, Angela Baldwin has my old portfolio with tons of cost share for the state. I would report monthly to them of this is how much we've committed, this is how much has been met, and this is how much we have left to commit. And I would do that monthly. And so that way I was staying on top of it. Best practice is to have the cost share tracking sheet going. We've got a couple on the RA Wiki and the URSO Hub for staff to use. That's the number one thing is the Gale and UCRP on federal funds, and then just not reporting or tracking or just keeping track of it.
No.
Yeah, I think, and I'll let Sarah and Hannah jump back in, but I don't know if this is like in the error category, but just something to keep an eye on is what we refer to as voluntary uncommitted cost share. So like we didn't put it up front in the proposal, but then maybe it's the RPPR phase for NIH and you start talking about effort above and beyond what was in the proposal. Like that, I think triggers, looking at if we want to report in number one and then like what effort, tracking responsibilities we have for the effort if we are reporting into the progress report phase. So it's just another kind of like risk area to look at. I don't know if Sarah or Hannah want to say anything else about them.
We do have a question, Miriam, and then we have some wrap up from Katie and CGA.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about if you have identified or charged or tagged more cost share than is required, what happens? Because I have heard that this is apparently very, very difficult to change, and I'm not quite sure that it creates problems, and I'm not quite sure why.
When you say more than is required, do you mean like, is it like what I was just talking about during the course of the project?
You've exceeded your cost share obligation.
But not necessarily just through voluntary uncommitted, right? This is like your cost share letter says we're going to contribute 50,000, and then they end up, saying we're contributing 150,000. Now you're 100K over, and like, how do you report? Does that run risks, right? That's what you're asking, Miriam.
Well, I guess that is a good question. I wish I asked that question, but yeah, okay, go ahead with that one.
And Katie can correct me if I'm wrong. I was under the impression that we just fulfill whatever we have written into our contract. If we commit anything over, it's like, cool. It doesn't really matter.
But is it a problem? So like effort, if an extra month of PI effort is tagged as cost share, and that puts us over our obligation.
I would say
is this a problem?
That's only a problem if it's a problem for whoever funded that cost share, or if it's if someone is literally transferring money besides just from what they were going to spend anyways into the CF1. If there's some other extra funds coming in, then they, that might be an issue, the actual spending. But yeah,
okay.
But Sarah said, as far as it, mostly you're done. So that's the good news part of it.
Yes, as Katie mentioned, it really depends on who's funding that cost share. If the VCR says we're going to contribute $20,000 to this project, and they transfer you $20,000, but then your PI spends $50,000, that's going to cause a $30,000 deficit on that line, and VCR is not going to be happy. I doubt they're going to want to transfer more budget because that's not what they agreed to, which means that overage would have to be moved off of that cost share and charged to the PI's discretionary funding. Like they would have to cover it. If it's the PI's own gift funding and he said, I'm going to commit 20,000, but ended up spending 50,000 in cost share, as long as there's enough budget in that gift fund to cover it and move to that cost share CF1 line, then they can do that. But we are not obligated to provide more than what we said we were going to.
Very good. Thank you.
Katie, you had some final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe not great as a final thought. It's a spooky story to keep you up at night. Cautionary tale. So I, been here over 19 years. So 20 years ago, I was with a nonprofit that was 20 years old in Berkeley and Oakland, the Jobs Consortium. It was employment services for homeless people. We ran welfare to work programs, but our biggest funder was HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And there was a cost matching requirement, a large part of which was being met by a training program that was valued. This goes back to the, valuing in kind stuff, that was valued in a certain way, that was going along just fine and with a verbal okay for years. And whether I don't know, the deepest details of that. I was actually working with another program, but the faith-based initiatives came down from the federal government under the George W. Bush administration. And that made things that were otherwise okay re-looked at. So it's just to say that, following what has been done on an award thus far may or may not be the most prudent course. It's not always feel safe to just check that, although it's certainly relevant to things. And the political environment matters. And yeah, so sorry for the bummer. Anyways, the whole nonprofit crashed and died. So, very, very quickly, because that was our biggest funder. And yeah, when I was working in an office of 2, down from 60, then it was time to go find a new job. So that's little sad story, cautionary tale, and sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really important thing to end on, which is we are in a changing landscape, and just to make sure that we're being really prudent and we're looking into everything and not just doing things the way that we used to do, and reaching out to your supervisors, reaching out to your SPO, CGA, and other experts on campus if you have questions. So with that's the end of our panel. I'm putting the end of panel survey in, so please take a moment to respond to the survey about how we did and what you'd like to see next. So let's give a round of applause to our awesome panelists. Thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend today's BRAG meeting. At some point I saw we had 110 people on our call, which is amazing. So please take a minute to provide feedback. And then we'll also be sending that survey out by email. So our next BRAG meeting will be our annual Research Administration Appreciation event. If you've been to those before, super fun. And we're going to be piggybacking on the RAC Forum. So it will be held in person on May 21st. We'll be at noon, and we're going to be at the Alumni House patio. Yeah, so I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. We're going to be sending out the RSVP form very, very soon. So please take a minute when you get that to respond so that we know how many people are coming so we can order food appropriately. And we will have prizes. Always important, we will have prizes. So thank you again. Hope everyone has a